The next fund update I'll give is on our most recently launched fund, the Wholesale Property Series No.1, or we love acronyms in property, WPS1. As you can see on the graph on the right-hand side, on both a total return basis and on a comparative to benchmark basis, the fund has done exceptionally well. I should also point out that this fund is only available to wholesale clients, so it means for those who are looking to invest, you do need to have an accountant's certificate, and the minimum investment amount is $250,000. This fund has proven extremely popular, and in under a year, we've raised almost $100 million in equity already. You can see here the unit price following 31 December revaluations has been uplifted to $1.07, and that's what's fed into a large part of the total return. Investors should also be aware that this fund will have a lower running distribution yield, typically around 4.5% and growing over time, than our typical funds that are available to retail clients. So what does the fund invest into? Well, this fund invests into a number of wholesale and partnership vehicles managed by Charter Hall. So instead of needing $10 million or $100 million to access those investments, we've made it available to our many and varied high net wealth clients. You can see here the top 5 tenants. In fact, the top 4 tenants are over 55% of the net income roll, and I think you're going to struggle to find a more diversified, stronger set of tenants in Bunnings, Telstra, the Australian government, and Woolworths. Importantly, the investment committee working with management has allocated the WPS1 investments across the numerous sectors, heavily weighting initially at least to industrial and logistics, the hardware portfolio being the Bunnings, as well as getting social infrastructure and office exposure. So look, that gives you a good update. WPS1 is launched under 12 months ago and it's already performing. That brings me to our first guest speaker for today. We have Sean McMahon, who's the CIO or Chief Investment Officer for the broader Charter Hall Group. He's also a member of the Wholesale Property Series No.1 Investment Committee. Sean is responsible for the broader group strategy across our investment capital transactions and M&A activity. Sean has over 30 years of property and investment banking experience and is highly motivated to deliver resilient earnings for Charter Hall and our investors. Please welcome to the stage Sean McMahon. So thanks for joining us, Sean. You've just seen up there on the screen the outperformance of WPS1. It was launched in March last year. Probably the worst possible time to launch any product, whether it's a property fund or an equities fund. Why do you think the fund has outperformed and done so well for our high net wealth clients already?
Yeah, good morning, Steve, and good morning, everyone. Look, it's no real surprise to me, to be perfectly frank, how this fund has outperformed. As you just have shown on your slides, it returned 8.3% in the last 6 months relative to the index of 2.8%. That's nearly 3 times outperformance. What drives that? In our view, what drives that is 3 things. Fundamentally, this fund is anchored to the best strategies that Charter Hall's rolled out in the real estate investment space over the long term. And fundamentally, direct investors or our retail investors are getting access to major wholesale scale strategies that have access to large scale real estate assets that are modern or new, anchored by long WALE, nearly 11 years in this vehicle, with fixed escalators or rent reviews of 2.7%. And if you look through who's paying the rent, as you just touched on, Steve, nearly half the rent is anchored by Woolworths, the government, Bunnings, Telstra. These are the biggest brands in Australia, and that provides long-term income security in our view, and also will naturally lead to resilient outperformance in the long term.
And you're right, many of these assets that WPS1 has an indirect investment into are the largest, most expensive assets. So even if you're a high net wealth client that may have $10 million to invest, this is still out of the reach for you usually. So I guess by lowering that entry point to $250,000 and giving, as you said, those best ideas and making them available, that is a key point of difference. So Sean, we saw WPS1 has a mixed allocation across different sectors. As a member of the IC, How do you decide on whether to go into industrial and logistics, office, long WALE hardware, Bunnings? Can you give the audience a little bit of insight into, I guess, the thought process of the committee?
Good, yeah. And look, that's a great question, Steve. So as a committee member, we've spent a long time looking at the various medium to long-term outlooks for all the sectors. This is a diversified strategy, which is critical. And fundamentally, one of the advantages with investing into a Charter Hall strategy of this nature is we have major scale in the Australian real estate market. At 45 billion, we have deep access across all the major sectors in Australia. That naturally leads to scale being a strategic asset, and that provides strong off-market opportunities. We know where our major tenant customer base wants to grow. We know which sub-markets are the preferred markets by many of our major tenants. And what this provides is unique ability to have deep market penetration, but also to provide our investors via this vehicle access to the big brands that we've just touched on in terms of tenant covenants. And over 50% of Charter Hall's entire funds management platform has repeat business with some of the major players in Australia. So we spend a long time on sector allocation, but I think we're nearly half weighted to industrial and logistics, which is the strongest global thematic in not only Australia but the world, driven by e-commerce and supply chain logistics. But also you would have seen we've upweighted into the Telstra Exchanges Wholesale Fund. And if you look through that investment, that's into data exchanges, which is also, driving as one of the highest growth sectors globally, but also in Australia. And COVID-19 is driving more demand for online, more demand for continued integration of our networks throughout the world. So that investment and that upweight into those exchanges, when you look through that investment, it's underpinned by a 20-year weighted average lease to Telstra, which is underpinned by effectively the NBN network, which services Australia's entire telecommunication network. But also we have a very strong focus on a land value thematic or a land value thesis, and the in-use value in that investment is equivalent to the land value, which is very unusual for an investment of scale of this nature. That will naturally lead to long-term resilience, and given the land value is close to the in-use value, it means in a long-term basis there's very little reversionary risk, and they're obviously located in all the major metropolitans across Australia. So that provides you a lot of alternative use scenarios as an exit in 20 years.
Thanks for that, Sean. It's really good to hear the fundamental thesis behind the Telstra Exchanges, which happens to be one of WPS1's most recent acquisitions, and in fact it was acquired during the December quarter. So look, while we've got you, any last words in terms of what to expect from Australian commercial real estate, I guess not just in the next 12 months, but on a medium to longer term basis?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Good question. Look, our view is that real estate, which is effectively a hard asset or a real asset, is well positioned looking forward in this lower for longer environment where interest rates are the lowest historically we've ever seen, around 2% at the moment. And if we can provide to our investors and our direct clients yields of 4.5% to 5% on tier one quality assets underpinned by some of the major brands and covenants in Australia, this provides a naturally very strong spread to bond yields, which are 1%, and if you invest in term deposits, etc., in savings, about 1%. So those spreads are higher than what we've seen for decades. And this spread will provide excellent outperformance, in our view, in hard assets or real estate in the future, particularly in industrial and logistics, driven by the tailwinds of e-commerce and online, and also into social infrastructure and other long WALE diversified strategies that we're embarking on in WPS1.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for that update. And look, I guess what I would also highlight, WPS1, as I said, is a wholesale client only, so you do need an accountant certificate, It does have a high investment minimum of $250,000, but many of the thematics which Sean just talked about, that long lease term, that focus on strong tenant covenants, that's something we focus on across the broader suite of funds. So you don't need to get invested in WPS1 to get exposure to those concepts and things that Sean just said.